Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining today's lunchtime webinar on Composable Banking, Driving Transformation in Financial Services. My name is Aline Pistorius, Head of European Marketing with Thoughtworks, and I will be your host for today. In case you're not familiar with Thoughtworks, we are a global technology consultancy that integrates strategy, design, and engineering to drive digital innovation. We are over 11,500 people across 50 offices in 18 countries. I will let our speakers introduce themselves. Omar, over to you.
Thank you very much, Eileen. Hi, everyone. My name is Omar Bashir. I'm a principal consultant at Thoughtworks. I work here at the intersection of the financial services practice and enterprise modernization, primarily working with our partners and clients in their legacy modernization and cloud adoption journeys. Over to Dogus.
Hello, everyone. Thanks, Omar. I'm Dogus. I'm from AWS, and I'm in the FSI go-to-market team in business development here. My role really is to speak to our FS customers and about how we can support and enable the execution of their transformation strategies through the cloud. So we speak with customers about more long-term thinking and about how we can achieve the bigger strategies and not just focus on the infrastructure and the core IT.
Great. Thank you both. Omar and Dogus will be discussing how banks can innovate with speed and stability by unlocking the full potential of cloud-native composability. The content shared today is featured in our recently published guide with AWS. This will be shared as well with all of you after the webinar. But before we get going, a quick reminder about Zoom webinar settings. I know by now we are all experts, but just a quick reminder, you are all muted. The chat is disabled, so please add your questions using the Q&A function below. We will allow time at the end of the presentation, of course, to go through the questions. Please select the CC button below if you would like to see closed captions. Today's session will be also recorded and shared with you in the coming week. And now, without further ado, over to you, Omar and Dogus.
Thank you very much, Eileen. The agenda that we are going to follow in today's webinar starts with what transformation means for banking. Followed by how composability and cloud nativity resonate with banking as a practice. Dogus will deep dive into what are the practical considerations in achieving composability and cloud nativity for banks. And we will then go through various transformation strategies, followed by questions that we are really looking forward to from you. So starting off with the transformation in banking, banking has changed tremendously in the last decade or so. Primarily, it used to be a relationship business, especially when more of physical banking was in practice. You had branch managers, and those branch managers had one of the key targets for the branch managers used to be building relationships with the clients who had accounts within the branches. Now, as we have steadily moved towards digital banking, more and more of those physical relationships have disappeared. And essentially, a part of it is to do with people not having the branches to visit in. In addition to that, the branch managers, because of the volumes of transactions and the number of customers, it has become quite unsustainable for branch managers to maintain those kind of relationships. Interestingly, it's now converted into a results business. Customers have relationships with banks. Customers define actually relationships with banks based on the results the banks are going to provide to them. And what customers are really looking towards as banks are making their journey towards digitalization is how they can access innovative products over their digital medium instantaneously and without friction. And that essentially is driving most of the change within banking. And as the regulators are also sensing a lot of this customer desire, they are also opening up the banking space to fintechs and the challenger banks. So innovation that is coming from that arena involves innovative products and digital experiences that are being delivered seamlessly to the customers. And using the feedback from the use of those products and experiences to better refine those products so that they continue to deliver results for those customers. And it is important to remember that the customers are not just looking for the results of their finances. They are essentially interested in the results that are about their life choices. And this is where the fintechs and the challenger banks have been quite successful in aligning the financial requirements and needs of customers with their life choices and life results that they're looking for. In addition to that, banking is becoming more and more inclusive in terms of participating in cooperative ecosystems, so that they could build that financial inclusivity and offer more engaging experiences to their customers. As an example, you have payments, which has seen a tremendous transformation in the last few years. The number of payments method has grown substantially, from cash and card to digital wallets, QR codes, even now to wearable devices. And essentially the emergence of all these frictionless payment methods is not just helping the customers, but also the businesses that those customers engage with to be able to drive most of their daily experiences. So, but at the same time, what we are looking at is that banks in several of the areas are struggling to capitalize on these opportunities. And research shows that banks are essentially anchored down because of the traditional technology and the engineering practices that are not enabling them to be able to move fast and to be able to deliver those digital products and experiences seamlessly. Essentially, what is happening is that the technology that the banks built were for the operating systems or operating models that the banks were utilizing in the past. And those operating models, because of the inflexibility of the technology, they are unable to change those operating models. And because of those operating models holding in place, they are unable to change their technology at the same time. And as a result of that, they find themselves pretty much anchored down and struggling to adopt digital practices. At this point, what we would like to do would be to conduct a very quick poll so that we could gauge what are your experiences or your observations and what is holding banks back from adopting digital practices. So Jenny has put a poll up. We'll have a few seconds and we would love to hear your answers as part of this poll. Good, we are seeing some results come in. This is interesting. Awesome, it's looking good. A few more seconds. I think another 5 seconds. If you can bring in your choices. Cool. I think let's have a look at what the results are like. Awesome. So Dogus, your thoughts on this? So business priorities are getting the highest votes.
Very interesting, because that's pretty much a lot of what we'll cover today. What we've seen, especially with the traditional banks, is that over years, they've got these business lines which are quite constrained in their vision and what they're focusing on. Within each business line, you have a number of, technology owners and technology leaders managing that individual business line. And then you have these competing priorities from across the enterprise about what goes first and what should we invest in, what should we not invest in. So it's quite an interesting perspective, and hopefully we'll be able to kind of provide some thoughts around this.
Yes, and closely following is technology, and it is as we said, technology tends to kind of like the more established a bank is, the more rigid the technology we find in our observation. So moving forward from here, Dogus will take over defining the resonance between composability, cloud nativity, and banking. So over to you, Dogus.
Thank you, Omar. So I'd like to just start by just talking about this term composable banking, composability, just kind of providing some definition. So composable banking is actually a modernization strategy, and it allows a bank to modularize and modernize their technology with a defined strategy. What we mean by this is that many banks have actually been on some level of modernization journey and buying modern SaaS vendors and modularizing through, lots of buy decisions. But a composable strategy will design and define this approach to ensure you have efficiency and you don't end up with more complexity. For example, if you buy lots and lots of SaaS vendors with no plan, you can actually end up with more complexity and more things to manage. So to define it, composable banking or business, because it actually applies across beyond just banking, is a capability-driven approach where you modularize and decouple your capabilities into reusable blocks. Some of these capabilities are reusable across your bank. So these are horizontals. Think things like risk and fin crime, required by multiple business lines, where traditionally each business line may have had its own risk system, trying to modernize it in isolation. The idea here is to invest once and then reuse across the enterprise, offering your capability almost as a service to the rest of your bank. But this goes beyond just technology. This also means to decouple your people, your processes for that capability. So for example, the fin crime experts own and drive the fin crime capability. Composability will reduce your time to market, as you can simply reuse and consume a required capability for a new business process or product or customer journey, rather than having to build it. It also means that you can focus on customer value and your differentiators. For example, in a customer onboarding journey, you want to build a great low-click self-service digital process. You want to ensure your customer experience is great and the customer knows exactly what to do, how to do it through a great level of UX and automation. What you don't want to do is spend months implementing a fraud system or a CRM system. You want these to just exist and to consume them through APIs. And an important clarification point is that composable banking is not just about consuming third-party services. It's not just about outsourcing your capabilities. The capability actually, in almost all cases, will be internal to your bank, because the underlying technology may be a buy or a build or a consume, but you still need to build processes, DevOps, and etc. around a SaaS solution, for example. So you can make independent technology decisions within each of your blocks.
So moving on to one example where composability is in practice is that of Bluestone. Bluestone is an Australian non-bank lender, and they chose Thoughtworks and Mambu for their digital transformation, which involved modernization of their technology stack. And that involved moving off a mainframe onto cloud-native composable architecture. So for those who don't know Mambu is a platform provider for composable banking, and we will talk a little bit about what such platforms look like. And this system was deployed over AWS, and it took us just 7 months to transform that entire mainframe application onto AWS. Now, the interesting thing is that it was not just, we were not just using the capabilities that Mambu had provided. We also built composable capabilities, which were custom built for Bluestone, and integrated that with the Mambu stack. And because of the composable nature, Bluestone were able to make very focused build versus buy decisions, which helped them to accelerate towards the market with their solution. And the transformation that happened as a consequence of that saved them significant amount of time in processing loans. And we all know that if you are applying for a loan, you are fundamentally looking at overcoming a personal hurdle in your life. And it is a stressful experience. You are quite keen to know the outcome of the process much sooner. And this is where small incremental changes were not just beneficial for the customers, but they saved a huge amount of time for Bluestone as well. That increased their capacity in processing loans, and at the same time provided them with efficiencies that every organization would welcome. I won't go through all the digits over here, but what I would like to highlight is that it was nearly about a day and a half, or a day and 1.5 person day that was saved across a day for an average of 30 loan applications in a day. And again, it increased their capacity and provided them with operational efficiencies.
Yeah, so and a very good point on this is that, for example, Mambu is a really good example. Mambu is a core banking provider which provides core banking services. But in reality, when you look at the mainframes of most traditional banks, their mainframes are doing a lot more capabilities, and a lot more has been built into those mainframes and those traditional cores than the modern SaaS core vendors, right? So a lot of traditional mainframes are doing payments, they're doing KYC, they're doing risk and fraud, right? And so this is exactly what the Mambu approach and the kind of composability approach, where you buy certain capabilities for certain areas, and then you start to straggle out some of those capabilities into separate solutions, and then you recompose them to work together to deliver you a modern solution. But we'll come on to some more examples. While we're on this slide, what I'd like to talk about is why the public cloud is actually an enabler for transformation for banks, because this is an important question. So for years, cloud providers have been actively working with financial services industry to bring the innovations and developments needed to suit your workloads. But actually, there are some synergies where the public cloud provides far greater value than on-prem. So firstly, banking is seasonal, which requires elasticity, right? Changes in economic circumstances, seasonal shopping habits, and etc. means that you need to be able to scale up demand as demand increases. Of course, cloud provides this scalability, meeting the demand at the moment in time without under-provisioning. But just as importantly, though, cloud can scale down, meaning you only pay for what you use and you don't over-permission or pay for services that when the demand is lower. And with regards to composability, this also means that each of your capability blocks is able to be elastic independently from each other. Banking also increases the need for compute. Compute is expensive. Think about generative AI and the latest innovations we've had there. That requires a lot of compute power. And an FS, which FS have been actively exploring. So for you, compute is a cost as a bank, but for the cloud, it's our business. So we invest in it, we make it efficient, and we offer virtually infinite compute power to an individual business. If you want to invest in an AI capability, for example, you can use a managed service that takes care of undifferentiated heavy lifting and provides access to compute required. And then finally, banking requires a degree of security and compliance, which is far beyond most other industries. For years, AWS, for example, I'll talk about AWS in this example, has invested in providing out-of-box compliance across services for regulations such as PCI DSS and GDPR. So as a result, once again, you're removing those heavy lifting from your workloads and you're able to focus on what really matters, which is your customer journeys and experiences. On this slide, I'd like to really touch on bringing to life how composability works in practice. So it's actually a two-stage journey. Step one is your foundation and your transformation. This is where you break down your bank into those blocks and you develop your capabilities. And then once they're established, you have this ongoing journey of compose and recomposed to deliver your latest innovations, products, services, and customer journeys. Say, for example, you want to deliver a new personal banking product. You can utilize the existing analytics, marketing, onboarding, and other servicing capabilities and add the requirements to their backlogs if you have any additional requirements that they don't currently have cover, and just bring them together to deliver that product. You don't need to rebuild or to continuously own these underlying capabilities, which is beyond you as a business unit, which is focusing on, for example, personal banking products. So there are 4 principles to a composable banking and how you define each of those blocks. Each of your blocks will need to adopt these principles to ensure they are built in the right way. Firstly, your block should be modular, decoupled, and independent, which enables autonomy, the ability to make individual decisions at that block level. However, there needs to be an agreed interaction pattern between them so that you can enable interoperability. Your capability blocks actually need to work with each other to deliver your workloads. So you need to enable orchestration. And then finally, once you've achieved the first 3, you enable discovery. This is the ability to continuously discover and deliver new opportunities within each component block using feature teams and a new way of working.
So the interesting thing about composability is that new business models are also emerging, and those business models are actually providing more revenue streams and not just operational efficiencies. So we are describing 2 prominent business models over here. So one of them is BAP, which is banking as a platform on the right-hand side of the screen. And this is fundamentally coming about from the perspective of technology companies that do not have a banking license, provide the technology, composable technology, and largely on public cloud to banks and financial institutions who have banking licenses to consume as SaaS products. And as a result of which, banks do not have to provide a lot of overheads to be able to deliver capabilities to their customers. And because of composability, banks are able to pick and choose the capabilities that they require. So for example, if a bank is largely into deposits and credits and they want to get into loans and they want to move fast, they can go to a banking as a platform provider, which, for example, Mambu or Thought Machine or 10x, and only get the loans capability from the platform provider. And as a result of that, they are able to later on, if they want to add more differentiation to that loans capability, they want to build it by themselves, they can build it in-house while the business is still running over banking as a platform. And eventually when their own capability is ready, they can swap it without business disruption for the capability that they had previously provisioned from banking as a platform. The second business model is banking as a service. This is where banks who have invested in building their banking capabilities and have done it with the diligence that they are composable and cloud native, they are able to offer those capabilities to other banks and non-banking businesses. And that enables for them to be able to project not just their technology, but a number of their products also to those other banks and non-banking businesses. One interesting example of this is Standard Chartered using the composable banking capabilities of Starlink, which is a challenger bank essentially, to offer Shoal, which is a sustainable investment platform for Standard Chartered. It is running off the platform that Starlink Bank has provided. So this is a very interesting case of an established bank partnering with a challenger bank, using the technology that the challenger bank has provided to be able to launch an innovative product for which there is a growing market need amongst a lot of their consumers. Now, the other interesting thing about banking as a service and banking as a platform is that the composable nature enables, as I said before, people to make decisions about early time to market, but it also enables them to kind of like customize those capabilities through their own development, and to be able to swap them when the time is right without creating any business disruption. Now, this does not stop here. You can actually have a kind of like a confluence of BAP and BAS. So for example, if I'm a bank and I don't want to spend a lot of overhead or a lot of energy in actually building the technology for running my business, I can actually go to banking as a platform provider and take that technology or those capabilities from them. And I can practically use that capability internally for my own business. And I can project that using APIs to other banks and non-banking businesses as a BaaS. And I'm able to offer financial products and services or that composable technology that I practically don't own. I just only subscribe. And that's an even more interesting business model that is emerging, although not very prevalent, but it's emerging in the market.
Yes, Omar, and we've seen the kind of excitement around open finance, and which was driven through open banking and, you know, diversifying revenue streams. So this is quite an important point. If you consider it as a bank, if you invest in a capability that's autonomous and modular and it kind of serves the rest of your bank as a service, that capability can then be monetized and offered externally as well, not only to other banks, but to non-banking providers. So this doesn't just cover banking products, which we've seen a lot of success in, especially around the loan space. So, for example, Barclays will offer loans through apple.com, so in the UK, for example, and so on. But this also applies to non-banking products. So as a bank, if you invest very heavily into a fraud and risk system and you've got great kind of processes around it, why don't you offer that externally? So people outsource their composable block to you, and then you diversify revenue streams. And I think it's quite an interesting area how this will develop over the coming years, especially with aligning standards through open banking and the conversations around open finance.
So moving on to practical considerations. So Dogus, we would love to continue to hear a lot more of your insights.
Yeah, no, I think this is a very important slide around how to make decisions on the way to design your composable blocks. I think the most important statement here is to remember that no two businesses are the same, and therefore no two composable enterprise architectures are the same, right? For some banks, having a horizontal payments capability makes total sense. But for others, they may have very specific payments requirements for, let's say, merchant services, which they offer to their corporate and commercial customers, which will require a level of functionality that the rest of the bank doesn't need, right? So the idea here is to design your capability domain first before making your technology decisions. And there are a number of factors to influence those decisions on how you design that domain. So firstly, you want to group functionality together and decouple unrelated components, right? You also want to localize change. Things that change together stay together. So for example, if you have one capability that has an element that changes every week and another element that changes once a year, maybe they shouldn't be together, even though they cover the same area of functionality. So this is the kind of push and pull you need to consider. You need to also base your capabilities on your target operating model. This is really important. How will you structure your feature teams? What areas do you have domain expertise in? How will your DevOps pipelines work? Sorry. So you need to consider operating and your operating model, and then how to break those capability domain up into that model. You also want to maximize reuse and reduce dependencies. If a certain step in a process is shared by lots of unrelated processes, like a fraud check, right, which is required by many, many steps in processes, whether it's onboarding, whether it's payments, whether it's various other things, then maybe that step in the process is its own capability. The weight and importance of each factor is once again personal to your bank, and design decisions will need to be made. So these are the kind of overlying factors to keep in mind and to make key decisions on where you separate out and where you join together. Very quickly on this point, on the top half of this slide, we mentioned about making independent technology decisions within each capability block. So this is where your decoupled modular feature teams can decide what's the best technology for itself, for its area domain. What are the requirements across the enterprise needed from you? What kind of technology should you invest in? What integration patterns should you offer to the rest of your bank? What type of compute makes sense? Do you want to buy or build? Do you want to go serverless, or do you want to go fully managed? What is the best storage facility? And also, does your capability need its own UI for colleagues, for example, for exceptions management, for customers? You can make independent technology decisions and ensure you bring the best of breed to your bank based on your bank's requirements. But your capability domain needs to know what those requirements are from across the bank so that they can ensure that they enable this discoverability we spoke about before. Omar, over to you to discuss some of those buy-in and open standards.
Thanks, Dogus. So the interesting thing is that when a lot of people, while trying to build their composable architectures, they try to look for the platforms that are available in the market, or try to build platforms for themselves as well. For them, interoperability and integration is largely about APIs and event brokers and event streams and so on and so forth. And that's only just one part of interoperability. You need to be able to integrate systems at the domain level, and so that the systems are actually talking the same language, and that language is the business language. And this is where open standards and BAN come into play. BAN is one of the open standards that is available in the market, and BAN, for those who don't know, is Banking Industry Architecture Network. So it's a consortium of banks that have come together, and they have actually defined the common architectural framework, which consists of the banking capabilities, core as well as non-core. And at the same time, they have defined the APIs and the data model for those capabilities, to interface with those capabilities, and to be able to run your business through those capabilities. Now, by adopting BAN, you would be able to build composable banking capabilities with interoperability across the industry. So what we are seeing is that people who or vendors who would like their capabilities that they offer as part of composable banking architectures, they are adopting BAN as an option, on top of other standards. The interesting thing that I was reading the other day is that with PSD3, which has come out in July, there is a lot more focus by the regulators on adopting standards across banking technologies that are open to other partners within the ecosystem. So we will see more and more focus, not just the requirement by the consumers of these capabilities, but also by the regulators, on having better compliance with standards, a better definition of standards, first of all, better compliance with standards, and at the same time, better performance of the APIs and integration mechanisms.
So thank you, Omar. On this side, I think just going back to that point you just covered, and also the buy versus build decisions. What I want to quickly touch on is this discussion of buy versus build. I think the reality is that it's not really a matter of buy or build. It's a matter of how much build versus how much buy. And within each capability, there's an element of both. In some capabilities, you may want to just mostly buy and just build some configuration and integrations around. Whereas in other capabilities, you may want to buy a core undifferentiated heavy lifting service and then build the enhanced journeys and features on top of it. So I think it's a question of where do you buy and where do you build? And in most cases, there's an element of both. And it's just about deciding for each block how much build and how much buy is required based on the requirements. Omar, would you like to quickly talk us through the Wardley mappings approach?
Yeah. So before I touch on that, you're absolutely right. It's people spend a lot of time talking about buy versus build, and it's not a question about buy versus build alone. At the end of the day, the devil is in integration. So whatever you buy, whatever you build, if you're going with a composable architecture, you will have to focus on integration as well. And this is where what we were talking about in the previous slide, having those standards to do the integration are so important. Now, Wardley mapping is a tool that enables you to actually make those build versus buy decisions. On the vertical axis, we are talking about what are the capabilities that are visible to the customer versus what are the capabilities that are less visible to the customer. And on the horizontal axis, we are talking about capabilities that are more differentiating for your business, less commoditized and less of a product into the market that are available off the shelf. And by building your value stream using a worldly map, or visualizing your value stream using a worldly map, you are able to make those decisions as to what capabilities you should invest in for building them in-house versus which ones you can buy off the market. Now, the interesting thing over here is that, especially for the incumbent banks who are looking at modernization, they should still be performing this exercise for a very simple reason, that the technology that they built a few years ago, the capabilities that they thought were Genesis or custom at that point in time, may be product or commodity today. And by building this mapping before setting out on your modernization of a particular capability, you are able to figure out how can you reduce your scope or your effort by picking up some of the capabilities and products off the shelf, rather than having to spend time in recreating those when there is no need for recreating them today.
Amazing. On this slide, I just want to very quickly touch on one element as well, and touching on, the buy-in standards you mentioned, and also what you just talked about in the integration. Interoperability is absolutely crucial to having a modular bank, right? You must have, these capabilities must be able to work together so that they can deliver those processes, as we mentioned. Let's consider make a payment on the left, right? It might be using a core banking system, a fraud system, and a payments gateway, and it might be a three-step process. Simplified, but that may be the case. So what you really want to consider is about implementing and investing in what I would call an integration and interaction platform, which enables three things. Number one, it enables connectivity across hybrid environments. So you may have some solutions on-prem, some solutions on different cloud vendors. How do you ensure that these can integrate together as efficiently and securely as possible? Number two, you need to enable all your integration pattern management. Everyone focuses on API gateways and API management, but there's a lot more integration patterns that you need to consider when you think about across enterprise business processes. And then finally, you need to have the ability to orchestrate or choreograph these processes. This should be outside of the systems of record, so that you're not creating dependence on a specific system. You want to be able to call, wait for a response, decide what to do next, and be able to choreograph or orchestrate those processes that you're trying to build. So along with component modularizing and creating your composable blocks, it's really important to create this underlying fabric that allows those blocks to come together. We've been having some very interesting conversation with customers with AWS on how we can help implement some of these points. So it's a good point. I think at this stage, Omar, we had another poll we wanted to just lift up. Jenny, if you'd like to raise that poll, we'll give everyone a few minutes just to answer, but just like to get everyone's thoughts.
Any thoughts? Cool. We have responses coming. So the question is about a key approach. I mean, it is quite possible, and it is generally the practice that people are using multiple approaches, but then there is always one overriding approach versus others. So what in your particular environment has been the choice? Interesting responses. Shall we give everyone another 10-15 seconds, because this is looking like an interesting outcome. Cool. I think let's have a look at the results. Awesome. Dogus, thoughts on this? Quite revealing.
Yeah. What I'm really liking, I would say this, is that the lift and shift approach is, it's still very valid in a lot of cases as a first step, but people are realizing that the best way to utilize the cloud and to modernize is to actually utilize the managed and native services that it offers. So I think that's a really good positive sign, that when you just simply lift and shift instances and virtual machines from on-prem to the cloud, you're not really utilizing the benefits of what these latest innovations have done. But the other point, and I think the greatest response, is the mix of in-house development and off-the-shelf products. And I think that's great to see that people have already, and hopefully the stuff we've spoken about today is being relatable. And I think what we're trying to discuss here is that take what you've learned and take what's working in that core modernization and then apply it across your enterprise beyond just core. But this is really interesting. What about yourself, Omar?
You left no words for me. You described it in so much detail. Exactly. I mean, what you mentioned in the end is about like having a mix of those and having and hopefully making those intelligent choices with the options people have with composability is going to be a great enabler for the firms that are going in that direction. And for people who are probably modernizing in-house 100%, it could be there certain regulatory requirements based on the domain that they're working with, so certain constraints. And it would be interesting to hear from them if they can reach out afterwards to share their experiences. It would be really interesting to talk to them about how they are going through that journey. So quickly moving on to transformation approaches, because we are coming to near the end. It is not just about technology, and we need to look at the wider aspects of this transformation. So transforming to a composable bank is always a challenging aspect for the incumbent or traditional banks. And there are two main approaches strategically that people are embarking on. So the first one is about setting up a digital twin. So fundamentally, traditional banks have been looking at this entire challenge from a perspective. Some of them have been looking at it from a perspective of that the challenger banks and the fintechs have had the advantage of a blank sheet of paper. They did not have their legacy operating models and their legacy technology anchoring them down. So some of them have embarked on the process of actually creating a digital twin, which is basically giving a blank sheet of paper to a part of the bank and enabling them, removing all the restrictions and barriers that the traditional banking operating model is putting on them, and enabling them to work like challengers. And one of the examples is of JP Morgan Chase and then NatWest's Metal. But the challenge over there is that you eventually end up with a two-speed bank. And in that two-speed bank, you have two different operating models. Now it's for the leadership to kind of like reconcile between those two-speed banks. Normally what happens is that down the leadership level, it introduces certain levels of complexity over there. And if you're not able to integrate or migrate between the two, then those challenges tend to increase. We have also heard of cases where, especially in the US, where some smaller banks went into this direction, and they have had to, because of those challenges, they have had to spin off the digital twin that they created into a new bank by itself. Also, an example of RBS. RBS went into this direction, and they had to their first digital twin they had to shut down because of certain complications. The second approach is incremental strangulation. So basically taking, looking at individual capabilities one at a time and transforming them into your composable capabilities. And Capital One, is one interesting example where they have been able to achieve a full public cloud native transformation. They shut down their 18 data centers and moved 100% to AWS. Now, the typical challenge over there is complexity of the task, as well as managing the scope. And there are approaches whereby you can reduce both the scope and the risk, as well as the complexity. And we would be more than happy to talk about those in more detail subsequently. And if we are not able to manage the complexity and the scope, then the risk is that your program stalls because of lack of the progress in the initiative, as seen by the business. Once you move in that direction, to be able to effectively execute a cloud-native program, you are fundamentally looking at decoupling your teams as well, and running them as autonomous autonomous structures, both on the delivery side as well as on the platform side. So you need to have an effective change delivery mechanism, which is more federated, which is more lightweight and objective. So it is using metrics to be able to guide the process, and the governance function provides the guidance to the teams. Is not very prescriptive, and those guidance are based on fundamentally your guiding principles as well as patterns that they can adopt. And the autonomous teams as well as the platform team have the ability to feed back to the governance function also as to how those fundamentally apply into practice. So ending this webinar, if we have to take three things from what Dogus and I have been talking, those would be that banking essentially needs to evolve into a more agile and more flexible business, into a more result-oriented business. And by delivering results to the customers, they will be in a better position to deliver value to them. And composability is one way where they'll be able to achieve that agility and flexibility. And composability out of the box also provides you opportunities for new business models, as we've discussed, and that will give you new revenue streams. And last but not least, public cloud's resonance with the banking business is just tremendous. I mean, I'm yet to see any technology that resonates so well with banking as a business. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you both for the presentation. I can see already a few questions in the Q&A, and while people keep adding more, I would like to invite those who are not able to stay throughout the entire Q&A to respond to our feedback form. You can find the link in the chat or scan the QR code in my virtual background. All right, over to the questions. Omar, maybe one for you. How would you assess a monolithic banking system to break it down into a composable architecture without a business disruption?
So essentially, when you're looking at a monolithic architecture, you need to fundamentally find those seams, and those seams actually exist within your business capabilities. And as you define those seams, you need to figure out how to be able to decouple the technology at those seams, provide the necessary interfaces, and incrementally migrate those capabilities, modernize and migrate those capabilities onto your public cloud. And while you're doing that, in order to avoid business disruption, you don't want a big bang or an all or none sort of transformation of the entire bank, because the downside risk is you will be unsuccessful and nothing will be migrated. So you would want to have those interoperability on top of what you are putting on your cloud native architecture as well as on your legacy architecture, so that the capabilities that you have modernized are able to work seamlessly with the rest of the architecture, and your hybrid architecture continues to deliver to the business. There is a lot more detail to that, and we are happy to share more literature with people on how we can enable banks to modernize without business disruption.
Good, thank you. Dogus, maybe one for you. How can a bank fulfill its regulatory requirements on a public cloud with as little overhead as possible?
Thank you. Yes. So look, on that one, I'll speak from an AWS perspective. We have what's called the shared responsibility model at AWS. And what that does is it helps you meet your compliance standards through this model. AWS provides compliance out of the box for many of our services. So I think currently it's at 143 standards PCI DSS, GDPR, HIPAA, HITEC, so on, are covered. And what this effectively means is that when you use one of those compliance services, we will take care of the compliance off the cloud, but you still need to take care of the compliance in the cloud. So for example, if you store data in a compliant managed database, the data will not leave the region it's set up in. So if you store it in London, it will stay in London, it will adhere to the GDPR standards and so on. But the way the data is stored at its core will also be in line with all those underlying standards. But you must ensure that you secure access to that database, right? If you leave the password as password, that's, you know, your responsibility. You also, you know, if you build a process to send data out of London into the US, like you actively built that process, then once again, that's down to your prerogative. I think what AWS really tries to do is take care of the undifferentiated heavy lifting as much as we can through our fully featured services and managed services. And so that's really where we try to help with compliance.
Thanks a lot. Omar, maybe looking at the time, one question for you. Do you think we can adopt BaaS without modernization and cloud adoption?
So that's a very, very interesting question. So a lot of banks are quite enthusiastic about putting the APIs out. And it's not just their enthusiasm, it's the open banking regulation that is requiring them to put their APIs out. Now, it is quite possible to build an API layer on top of your legacy banking system to enable interoperability with other partners. And you could actually you could actually implement BAN APIs on top of mainframe if you want to. The challenge over there would be that if your backend is tightly coupled and you are unable to differentiate or between different capabilities and within your backend, there will be a huge amount of complexity underneath the hood of those API layers, and maintaining them would be a challenge. And then the second reason is that if you're successful in it, then you will have businesses coming in to partner with you. So at some point in time, you will outrun your capacity. And once you outrun your capacity, then you will be turning business away. And because you would need some physical time to actually procure more capacity by buying more servers and racking and stacking them in your data center, and at the same time wiring it all up and all that. And that is where going cloud native, when you're going cloud native, makes really good sense. And that is why I said before, just a few minutes ago, that cloud nativity and banking, the resonance is just absolutely amazing. So if you are running BaaS, and if you are on-prem, and if you're on legacy, then at some point in time, you will reach your capacity, even if you're successful in exposing your capabilities through APIs. So maybe you want to do that to start with, but at the same time, you should start looking at how you become cloud native also.
Just to add very quickly to that as well, Omar, it's quite an interesting conversation, because whenever we speak about open finance, open banking, or BaaS, we tend to focus on that integration layer, which is usually, how do I offer my APIs? The reality is that building the APIs is somewhat the easy bit. Being able to have a automated, headless, underlying process which can give you a great customer experience to that partner is really the complex bit. So if, for example, you offer a loan product to a third-party company, right? Let's say a checkout website or something. And when the customer clicks on apply for loan or buy now, pay later, that takes them to a PDF form they have to fill out. That's not a good service, right? And so it's really important that you really think about your go-to-market strategy, because you're effectively going into a new business as a technology provider or a capability provider. And how do you ensure maximum kind of what will make Apple want to use your product over someone else's? That's the question. And one interesting point, we won't go into it now, is I think a really good one from the US is the Apple buy now, pay later scheme that they've come out with, where they partner with Goldman Sachs, and the way that actually works in the background, where it makes it really simple and integrated for the customer, but in the background there's a lot of stuff going on, and it's a really interesting use case.
Right, thanks a lot. Omar and Dogus. Omar, if you could bring back the feedback slide so that everyone who haven't had a chance to provide feedback, please do so now via the QR code. And as mentioned before, we will share the recording, so please keep an eye out for an email from us. Thank you all for joining us today. Thanks a lot to Omar and Dogus for being our speakers today. And yeah, enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you very much.